Morning, everyone, and welcome to cleantech session of World Knowledge Forum, hosted by 매일경제, representative daily newspaper. My name is Sungwoo Kim, head of Environment and Energy Research Institute at Kim & Jang, the biggest law firm in Korea, with a dedicated team that I belong to. With 30 years of experience in this field, I'm really happy to moderate the session of under the title of Cleantech and Trump 2.0. We are very lucky today to have Mike Booth on my left. He's former executive vice president of Breakthrough Energy, which was founded by Bill Gates, and it's the top global cleantech investor in the world. And on his left, we have Samuel Morillon, who is vice president of sub-region Pacific of Siemens Energy. No need to explain about Siemens Energy. It's as you know, the global top energy leader. I have lived in Korea for 56 years, and I cannot sleep without air conditioning in September 10th. I cannot believe I'm doing this. But I think we are in trouble from the climate change. As you all know, we already the world temperature already crossed the tipping point of 1.5 degrees Celsius last year. And according to IEA, since 2019, clean energy investment has been doubled to $2 trillion last year, but we still need more than double to 4.5 trillion in 2030 to attain the target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Reason that I'm saying this is we have a long way to go, but as you see from the title of this session, after Trump came in, U.S., which has the biggest influence to the world, changed it a little bit, using regulation, executive orders, and tax credit cut, the permissioning, etc. And within a couple of months, DOE canceled 3.7 billion funding for climate tech. And last month, EPA canceled support for solar for all of 7 billion funding support. And finally, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management order to stop the offshore construction with 80% completion last month. So this is what's happening right now. But there must be some opportunities and there must be some risks that we have to recognize before we set up some strategy and do some investment. So with that, I hope that the Mike and Samuel can shed a light on guide us to some clarification on contradiction or confusion that we might have. Mike, yours.
Terrific. Thank you, Sungwoo. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk a little bit about the topics that he just walked through. I will spend a little bit of time talking about the kind of a quick snapshot of where the money is going or not going, kind of a picture of where the clean tech investment is. I will spend most of my time talking about some of the headwinds and some of the tailwinds that are creating both huge opportunities and huge challenges in the US market right now. And then I'll close with just a comment on kind of my sense of the recipe you need to take in part to navigate this uncertainty. Before I do that, I will just say the way I think about this from my time at Breakthrough Energy and working for Bill Gates is to really think about the clean energy innovation ecosystem as a puzzle of three very intersecting factors. The first is technology, the state of technology, both the pace of innovation, the breadth of innovation, what's coming out of labs and universities, what's coming out of corporate in-house innovation shops. And that has shifted a lot in the last decade, where the pace and breadth of innovation is amazingly robust. The second factor in that puzzle is the capital that those innovations are able to attract and the markets that they have access to. So thinking about capital markets that support and invest in those many innovations that are thriving, that picture has been a little bit blurry. And honestly, there's been some big advancements and some drawbacks to it. Emerging technology has long been at a disadvantage compared to mature technology in attracting traditional capital. And so that influences where money goes today. Technology, capital and markets. And then the third piece, and kind of a lot of the topic of today, is the policy and regulatory environment into which those innovations have to land. And for 20 or 30 years now in the United States, it has been very much a ping pong policy game of things going forward and things going back, and things going forward and things going back. And if anything, what people in the investment and financial community care most about is stability and durability and certainty. And the policy environment has provided the exact opposite of that for way too many decades. So anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that framing. Real quickly on the kind of the financial picture, like where the money's going. There's a great, relatively new outfit called the Clean Investment Monitor in the US that is tracking where dollars are going into and out of clean energy projects. And according to their last figures, over the last 4 quarters, more than a $250 billion, so about $277 billion, were being spent and invested in the manufacturing and deployment of clean energy in the US. 60 billion of that occurred in the second quarter of 2025. That's a pretty hefty number compared to where we were before. It's about an 8 or 10% increase over that same period of time a year ago. And so on the one hand, it feels like on the tails of a lot of public money, private capital is coming off the sidelines to support these technologies. On the other side, as Sungwoo mentioned, the administration, the current administration came in and has really clamped down both from the money flowing out of the government and the rules it's putting in place on traditional existing renewable technologies. So wind, solar, electric vehicles. And in that area, a whole bunch of projects have been canceled. More than $18 billion worth of solar and wind projects have been pulled back so far this year. So it's a little bit of a hit or miss story on capital in the US. I will say, the US is obviously not the only place where these private investment dollars go to support clean energy technology. And in Europe, what's happening is a huge surge in investment over the last 12 months on renewables. More than 3/4 of all the wind and solar, the utility scale wind and solar projects that are being built around the world are being built in China. So investment is certainly flowing there to a lot of renewables on the wind and solar side. And when you look globally, what's happened over the last 12 months is a significant increase in the amount of money going to clean energy technology and deployment. So it is a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of how the US policy environment is influencing the flow of capital, and it's not consistent across the world. Let me take now a chance to talk about some of the tailwinds and headwinds that I think are influencing that picture. There's really 4 that come to mind for me. One is around the massive increase in energy demand that's happening in the US, but it's happening here in Korea, it's happening around the world. So I'll talk a little bit about energy demand, talk a little bit about electricity prices and affordability, which is having a big impact on the way that the US is approaching this. Talk a little bit about the domestic politics that are shaping it, and a little bit about the international geopolitics side of it. So on the energy demand piece, I will just say, people have been talking about this the last 2 days here, just what a massive surge in energy demand is happening from AI, data centers, US manufacturing, electrification across the economy. Most estimates in the US say that we will increase by 2x or 3x the amount of energy demand that is needed, that is happening across the country. That is a crazy amount, and an amount that our grid cannot support in the way that it's currently designed and operated. And if wind and solar are going to have a little less public money going to them, hyperscalers, the big tech companies, are searching for other places to find generation to support that energy demand. And so what's happening in the US, and honestly supported by the Trump administration, is a huge amount of interest from tech companies in nuclear fission in particular, where you see companies like Google and Microsoft and others doing huge long-term power purchase agreements for nuclear in a way that they wouldn't have done 2 or 3 years ago. They are also doing the same thing for advanced geothermal technology, which is happening across the western half of the US, but also in places outside the US. It is a technology that the current US administration also greatly supports. So that huge increase in demand is driving tech companies and the people with the most capital to some of those technologies that frankly have a little bit more political viability. On the affordability and rising electricity prices side of things, there's a whole bunch because of this demand that is shifting the way costs are allocated in the US. There's also a whole lot of kind of non-cost barriers to getting projects built that are increasing the costs of most of these projects. Permitting, supply chain constraints, labor, access to talent, all of those things. And over time, that is going to continue to increase the cost. It would have happened, honestly, under Biden. It's going to happen under Trump, where we have a trend here that is problematic when it comes to people wanting to put money in projects that have a lot of those non-cost barriers around them. On the domestic politics side of things, I would just say, and unfortunately, as somebody who lives in Washington, D.C., what's happening on the ground is a little more nuanced than the black and white headlines that are appearing around the world. Yes, this administration is pulling back on the renewables side of things, particularly from existing technology like wind, solar, and electric vehicles. The kinds of things that were supported under the Inflation Reduction Act and a large infrastructure bill under the Biden administration. However, there are a whole set of tax credits, which was the fundamental part of those pieces of legislation and hugely incentivizing to small startups and large corporate buyers, that remain intact. So if you're doing a project on nuclear or advanced geothermal or storage or fuels or carbon management or minerals, critical minerals, those tax credits remain in place. In some cases, they have been increased, and they're in pretty good shape into the early part of the 2030s. What that's doing, though, is jolting the investors who don't quite know how long to bet on these technologies that are having kind of shifting sand underneath them. But at least for the emerging tech side of things, that is a more promising picture than it looked like before. And I'll just say real quickly on the international geopolitics side, obviously, the trade deal negotiations that the US administration is engaged in, the kind of upending of long-term allies, partnerships with Korea, with Europe, with others, is shifting some of these supply chain and long-term technology investments in a way that 2 or 3 years ago we would have never anticipated. I will close real quick in a minute just by saying that the way that I think you have to navigate all of that uncertainty is by paying attention to a few realities that are shaping that system. One is the reality of what's actually right for the market today. So investors and companies that want to be buying these technologies, this energy, have to think about what is the universe of available or ready to deploy technologies for today or tomorrow, not 10 years from now. Some of what I talked about is going to be available 5, 10 years from now, but these hyperscalers, and frankly, many in the Trump administration are focused on what is the thing we can do to deliver more energy tomorrow. So that's one consideration. The other is just the challenge of timeline and speed to market, how quickly you can make these innovations go from lab to market to first of a kind pilot to commercial viability? The answer on that varies across these technologies and is really informing where the dollars are going. And the last piece is something my old boss, Bill Gates, talked a lot about, which is a green premium that exists on so many of these technologies. And really, which companies are willing to be the first mover to absorb that premium in cost so that you start to move these technologies further down the cost curve and into greater viability from a commercial standpoint. How those all work out is a huge open question, but it's one that's shaping where these dollars are going.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you give a big applause to him? Well, I think that was very clear, and I think it inspired many audiences. And I'm going to get back to you with some questions on AI demand and 13% increase, a little bit of elaboration later on, and Chinese expansion, etc. Well, we'll move on to the Sam. He's managing portfolio not only of cleantech but also the other technologies as well. So it's really good, and he's actually on the ground to do the marketing and do the business at the moment. So his feeling is what actually that as a business leader, it's really curious about that his feeling and his prospect and role.
Yes, first of all, I mean, big thank you again for being here again this year. I mean, it's good as well to see that in the audience that the topic is interesting, and thank you for your words, which were really inspiring. Actually, I would like to start, if you don't mind, with a very simple statement. The war or the battle against the catastrophic CO2 emissions will be won or lost in Asia Pacific. It's where things are happening and will happen in the next 10 to 15 years. For this, basically, we need to agree on very simple figures. 50% of the worldwide emissions of CO2 are here in this region. This region starting from India to Korea, China, down to Australia, it's here. It's obvious, it's more than 50% of the worldwide population. It's as well basically where we have the most industrialized countries in the world. So when we are speaking about emissions, it's not basically, we do not have to look at on the other side of the planet. It's going on here, precisely and now. Having said this, basically I just would like to give you some tangible examples when we are speaking about 50% of the worldwide emissions. It means that every year we vaporize the equivalent of roughly 30 times the city of Seoul. Every year, basically, we put this in the sky. As you are a US citizen, it's as if we were basically burning one Empire State Building every 3 minutes. So this is what we are currently doing. This is the legacy we are currently giving to our next generations. And to move on in this direction, when we look at the dynamic, we see that basically on one hand, our energy system remains on coal in the region. Close to 50% of energy emissions are linked to coal. And we see as well, on the other hand, that the addiction to coal is increasing. It's linked to what you were sharing. Basically, there is an increasing demand in the energy sector. This is what we see, between 3 to 4% per year in the region. And this is basically translate into an increasing demand for fossil fuels. On the other side of the coin, there is also something very paradoxical in the region, in this region. When we have some very conflicting debates in the United States, for example, and many European countries as well, here in this region, there is absolutely nobody who is basically arguing anything against the energy transition and the needs that we need to decarbonize. I can take examples basically in India, in Japan, or here in Korea, where basically the latest statement of President Lee are pretty clear. regarding the necessity to switch to a decarbonized industry and to step out of the coal business before 2040. And to go on in this direction, it's also in this region that we have the largest conglomerates working precisely on decarbonization. I will not speak about the number of patents basically produced by Korea, Japan, China, which are representing close to 70% of the worldwide patents in the energy transition topics. I will simply underline that we have the largest company here in the region producing photovoltaic panels, producing wind turbine, engaged in the hydrogen economy, and supporting basically all the transformation we do need to make things happen correctly. So on one hand, emissions are increasing, but on the other hand, basically, we have everything to be successful. And for here, I just would like to give you some examples of what is currently going on in the region. Let me start with Australia, the country where I live, even if I'm French. We are currently supporting what we name an energy zone close to Sydney of 7 gigawatts, where we are developing basically an entire grid to build wind farms, 7 gigawatts. In Japan, we have commissioned last year the largest offshore wind park in Asia Pacific, in Hokkaido, Ishikari. It's where as well, basically, we will commission in the next week the largest electrolyzer, so hydrogen, green hydrogen facility in the region as well. It is in Korea that we have commissioned and that we are going on implementing the largest turbine able basically definitely to burn gas, but as well to be ready to use flexi-gas and hydrogen in the future. These projects in terms of size have nothing comparable to what we are doing in Europe or in the United States. It's going here in Asia Pacific. And Korea here is a key country in what we want to achieve and what is going on. So having said this, to conclude the point, what is the missing piece? Why with all this fantastic, let's say, initiative in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of knowledge, in terms of political willingness, I think about what you are still doing and again doing in Korea with the offshore, let's say, actions, with all what you are doing around decentralized energy. What is the missing piece? And here again, we need to look at the map. Asia Pacific is huge. It's 50% of the size of the planet. It's a multiple of countries which are quite isolated, even physically. When you look at the map of Europe, Europe is smaller than Australia. And here in this region, we do not have all these interconnections, power interconnections we have everywhere in the United States, in other continents. So basically, when you start a project to switch to renewables, you need to do it at the country level, which basically limits a lot the economy of scales and requires a geopolitical balanced environment to be able to be successful. And here's my point. If we want really to be able to be successful and to reduce basically the CO2 emission, considering what is going on with this huge increasing demand we have in front of us in the next decades, with artificial intelligence, with the development of the electrical vehicles, and simply because countries like India, Cambodia, Vietnam will have the willingness definitely to be at the same level of development as the other countries, we need to develop the basic infrastructures to support basically cleantech, the grid. And my dream, when I look at basically the picture of l'Odyssée, I'm just thinking about Joachim du Bellay, who in the 12th century was writing about Homer, and he was saying in French, "Heureux qui comme Ulysse a fait un beau voyage," which means that the journey will be expensive. Clean techs are not cheap. The journey will be difficult. We need to have in mind that we will have increasing political and geopolitical conflicts because of energy. But we know where we want to go, and we have to decarbonize. Thank you.
Please give him a big applause. Again, well, that really inspired me that since you just have a right point that we, as Asia Pacific region, we are the heavy emitters, and also we are heavy investors in clean tech as well. Let me just back up with a number, as some of you already know. In 2024, among the global renewable energy new additional investment amounting to 585 gigawatt, the Asia Pacific's additional capacity was 421 gigawatt. So that's a 72% of entire one. So that matches with what he just mentioned. I think we are doing a good job, and Korean government last couple of days we announced new combined ministry between climate and energy, and also we sort of have a very ambitious target leaked throughout the newspaper last couple of days. You already might already know that. Let me just start the question. Since both of you all mentioned about the demand increase, let me ask question to Mike on demand increase. One of the things that I think it's a little bit confusing out of the U.S. policy at the moment. Obviously, Trump is doing a lot of regulation change and everything, but I'm just wondering if that can meet even AI demand of electricity of 84 gigawatt by 2030 within the United States only, given the situation that if you order the gas turbine, it will take 4 years from now on, and SMR, it's not going to be ready for 3 years at least. And without the renewable energy addition or clean tech addition, which is fast and even cheaper, how is he going to do it?
It's a great question. The math does not add up. And the truth is that was a challenge. That would have been a challenge if President Biden had been reelected, and it is a challenge under President Trump. The truth is we have, as Sam also mentioned, just this massive amount of growth in an energy system in the United States that has for probably 3 decades seen almost no growth. It has been pretty steady since the 1990s. And all of a sudden, over the last 4 or 5, 6 years and into the next 20, right, people are projecting this massive increase. What many folks have been saying is what you just described, which is in that environment, why would you want to take anything off the table in terms of the ability to meet that demand? Any technology that could increase generation in an affordable, reliable way, we should be doing. If that was your case, what President Biden was doing was trying to say, in frankly a kind of protectionist way with the Inflation Reduction Act, let's bring as much kind of reshoring of manufacturing to the United States and build these industries that can deliver that generation in a way that we hadn't been in the previous 20 or 30 years. What Trump is saying is he wants energy dominance in the US economy, which is sort of his version of that same story. And what is a little mystifying is, I think for ideological reasons, not for market reasons, they are taking wind and solar and electrification in terms of transportation kind of off the table at a time when most analysts, even those in the oil and gas sector, would agree you need to be bringing sort of all of your options to the table. So to your point, I think politically that will run into a problem for this administration in 2 or 3 years, where they promised we are going to be able to meet all this demand, we are going to reduce your electricity bills, reduce your costs, and unleash this great era of American dominance on energy. If we're sort of tying our hands behind our back on 2, in solar and wind, of the lowest cost, most pervasive forms of energy that have really resurged in the last 10 years. So, yeah, I think you make a really good point. The math does not really add up, and it'll be interesting to see if the politics of that, people reacting to their bills going up because they're not getting to choose the cheapest form of energy, will somehow hurt the administration.
Thank you, Mike. I'm also wondering if the Trump administration, does it see this clean tech or climate investment market small enough to blink at Chinese dominance in global market? Right now, the China is actually pretty much dominating the clean tech technologies. And is he comfortable with that, or just because he's obviously walking away from the clean tech technology for a short period of time in the U.S. So that make the China bigger. Would that be okay with him?
Oh, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I would say that is a challenge that both President Biden and President Trump have tried to address. The relationship between the U.S. and China is a complicated one that goes way beyond the energy sector. And so in thinking about how either of these presidents address this slice of the problem, I think it's hard to divorce that from all the other geopolitical issues, trade and otherwise, that are shaping that. I will say, as you said, if you look at the clean tech technology map of sort of the 10 biggest, most promising, most invested in, most accelerating technologies, China is dominating 8 or 9 of those 10, right? And so part of the logic of the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill that was passed in the US was to try to resurrect domestic industries to compete with that Chinese dominance. Whether that was going to be successful even under a Biden administration is an open question, but for the first time in 20 or 30 years, the US government was putting dollars there in a meaningful way. This current administration is taking a very different tack. They are not, their bet is on more fossil energy, on oil and gas, particularly natural gas. They are doing things like making sure in their trade deals that they're incentivizing oil and gas more than renewables. They pushed, a whole bunch of LNG purchases on Korea as part of a trade deal here. So anyway, I think it's hard to see them prioritizing the clean tech pieces of this in their China competition. But I do think, like the Biden administration, they are very focused on how do we reshore domestic industry in a way that can at least put the US on better footing vis-a-vis China. From where I sit, that seems like a little bit of a losing race, just given how dominant they are in so many of these sectors.
Thank you. We just timed up. I'm sorry, I was going to open up the floor, but would like to close the session. As the Samuel mentioned, that Odyssey is expensive, but it's not always. If we take a closer look at the reality with a balanced thinking, pros and cons, and risk and opportunity, and scale up in my mind. Thank you so much.